There's a saying that if a Formula 1 car looks fast, it is fast. But some designers have ignored that over the years, with some weird and wacky designs emerging in search of that elusive competitive advantage. So when we came to pick our choice of the 10 most bizarre designs, we had to work through a very long list. Our only criteria are that the cars must have actually competed in F1 World Championship races and have some visually obvious design oddity that went against the norm, and that our choices cover a broad time span. 2014 was the peak of Formula 1's weird nose era, and usually it's the angular, borderline obscene Caterham CT05 that is remembered. But it was the Lotus team that produced the most bizarre interpretation of the regulations with its infamous twin tusk design. By splitting the nose in two, the objective was to allow cleaner airflow between the tusks to the centre of the car by reducing the aerodynamic blockage created by a conventional central nose tip. In order to make it legal, the tusk lengths were offset. The tusk on the right side from the driver's perspective was just over 5 cm longer than the one on the left. This was in order to satisfy the regulations that demanded a single nose tip. Both tusks acted as a crash structure, but it was a struggle to pass the crash tests. While the Lotus E22 was an inconsistent, overly sensitive and uncompetitive car, the twin tusk nose itself did work broadly as hoped. Rule changes outlawed it for the following year, with Lotus testing a conventional nose in practice for the 2014 United States Grand Prix ahead of a full switch in 2015. There have been some extraordinary rear wing designs in Formula 1 over the years, but none beat that of the Tollman T183G. And all because Rory Byrne, then still building a reputation that would make him one of the most celebrated designers in F1 history, hit upon what was then a unique double aerofoil design. The concept was simple. With the width of the bodywork more restricted behind the rear axle, the wider forward part of the rear wing was designed to work with a narrower rear part to produce more downforce. While controversial, the design was legal and rivals rushed to copy it. And it helped Tollman to vastly improved form in 1983, albeit with results limited by poor reliability. But the team did pick up a run of points finishes late in the season, its first in Formula 1. The zero side pod design of the Mercedes W13 created one of the oddest looking F1 cars of the 21st century. This is thanks to the curious shape of the front part of the side pods, necessitated by the need for a consistent radius of the bodywork to satisfy the regulations. It makes for a bizarre looking car that looks ever more strange the closer you get to it, thanks to the shrink wrap effect at the front of the side pods. The car has struggled with porpoising and bouncing, but this can't be blamed on the side pod concept itself. As trackside engineering director Andrew Shovlin points out, Mercedes has made big strides during 2022 while retaining the narrow side pods. Whether Mercedes perseveres with the zero side pod concept in 2023 remains to be seen, especially with Williams already having ditched its similar design. But whatever happens, the W13 will live long in the memory as one of the most curious cars of recent times. The Tyrrell 025 of 1997 was one of the most curiously angular cars of the 1990s, with its single pillar front wing support and pointy nose. It only became more unsightly once it sprouted X-wings early in the season. But as Mike Gascoigne, then Deputy Technical Director working under the legendary Harvey Postlethwaite, said of the car, "Not a beauty, but it worked." The car was underpowered thanks to using the Ford ED customer engine and struggled with Goodyear tyres that were difficult to switch on. But it was fundamentally a good car, and in the hands of Mika Salo, it had its day of days in the 1997 Monaco Grand Prix, running without a pit stop and finishing 5th in the wet. The X-Wings came and went during 1997 as the underfunded team made the best of its limited resources. But the odd-looking Tyrrell 025 made a bigger impact with its visuals than its results. Formula One's crop of 2008 cars were a strange bunch, with all sorts of aero devices springing forth from every possible surface as teams tried to maximise all the downforce generating and flow conditioning opportunities ahead of the simplification of the rules in 2009. But the Honda RA108 was the most curious looking of this crop of cars. Primarily, this was down to the so-called Dumbo wings on top of the nose. In Honda's case, it looked more like a seagull had landed on top of the nose than a deliberate design feature. Other teams ran versions of this, including BMW Sauber and McLaren, but Honda's was comfortably the least elegant. And with the rest of the car equally ungainly, it stands as proof that if a car looks bad, there's a good chance it will go badly as well. Michael Schumacher's first Ferrari Formula 1 car, the F310 of 1996, wasn't one of John Barnard's best. The bulky, ungainly car had the look of an armchair thanks to its gigantic cockpit sides, which were a stark contrast to the more compact design produced by pace-setting Williams. This was down to a combination of the new rules requiring increased headrest protection for the drivers and Barnard following the lead of aerodynamicist Tony Tyler, who headed up the wind tunnel programme. It produced good downforce numbers but fundamentally compromised the airflow into and around the airbox. The car had its moments, with Schumacher winning 3 races, but it was often unreliable, and even when changes were made, notably a switch to a high nose in Canada, it remained one of the oddest looking Ferrari F1 cars ever produced. Tyrrell Project 34, or P34 as it was known, was once a top secret design worked on by ace designer Derek Gardner in the utmost secrecy after he hit on the idea in 1975. But as soon as the car made its racing debut in 1976, it became one of the most celebrated in F1 history. The idea of the design was simple. Run 4 front wheels of reduced diameter on 10-inch wheel rims. This reduced drag and meant that the car was immediately quick on the straights, while theoretically maintaining the required grip levels. The P34 claimed 14 podium finishes in its 2 seasons in F1, with its sole victory taken by Jody Scheckter in the 1976 Swedish Grand Prix at Anderstorp. While an ingenious design, the fact Goodyear couldn't put the required development resources into the bespoke front tyres and the capricious handling, not helped by the fact it was possible to lock up the various front wheels independently of each other, meant the P34 never fulfilled its potential. 6-wheelers were eventually banned in 1983, but nobody other than Tyrrell raced such a design. The walrus nose Williams FW26 is one of the most memorable failures of 21st century F1. Hopes were sky high heading into the season after Williams had a run at the 2003 World Championship, but the car disappointed. Conceived by aerodynamicist Antonio Terzi, the concept was simple. As Williams co-founder Patrick Head explained at the launch, the wide nose would allow the maximum airflow to the front of the floor, although it did come at a cost in terms of weight. The trouble is that the aerodynamic benefit of the increased airflow between the nose pillars was relatively small, while the disadvantages, including the fact that it was sensitive to crosswinds thanks to the shape of those front wing support pillars, were significant. The walrus nose car managed just 2 podium finishes in 12 races and was replaced with a conventional design at the Hungarian Grand Prix. A sports car racing in F1? Well, sort of. The Mercedes W196 is unique in Formula 1 history in that it was a closed-wheel car, well some of the time at least, that won World Championship races. The W196 won 9 out of the 12 World Championship races it contested, but while 6 of those were with the conventional open-wheel design, 3 of those victories were using the Type Monza aluminium bodywork, colloquially known as a streamliner, or to use the wonderful German word, Stromlinienwagen. The Streamliner also won the non-championship 1954 Berlin Grand Prix with Carl Kling. The car wasn't without its faults. The great Juan Manuel Fangio struggled with the Type Monza bodywork when he raced it at Silverstone in 1954, owing to being unable to see the front wheels. This led to him clipping the oil drums marking the corners repeatedly. That was the only time the W196 Streamliner raced, but didn't win. The W196 is not the only streamliner to have raced in F1, but it is the only successful one there has ever been, and likely ever will be. The 1995 McLaren is infamous as the car Nigel Mansell was unable to fit into properly at the start of the season. But there's far more to its struggles than the 1992 World Champions' ill-fated dalliance with McLaren. Designed by Neil Oatley and head aerodynamicist Henri Durand, the MP410 and its wider monocoque successor, the MP410B, never looked right. It was the first McLaren with a raised nose and featured an innovative mid-wing mounted on the airbox. This gave the car a Frankenstein's monster feel, all angles and disjointed lines. And the car performed a little like it looked, particularly early on when it was, to quote Nigel Mansell, dreadful. Famously, Mansell didn't last long in 1995, but the team was stuck with the MP410 for the whole season. The car had its moments and McLaren was a distant fourth in the Constructors' Championship, but if points were rewarded on aesthetics, it would have been last. Let us know in the comments what cars you'd have chosen to include and which weird design is your favourite. And if you like what you see, remember to like and subscribe.